did I realize I was gay? You know, that's a good question.
When did I become aware of being gay?
You know, I think I knew before I knew.
There was always some intuition I had about, I know that there's something different here.
This is really weird. But I remember watching National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation and thinking Chevy Chase was so handsome. So handsome.
I knew I went to the movies on Friday nights and saw all the cowboy movies, and I remember thinking as they rode off into the sunset, I wanted to be on that horse with the cowboy. I never thought I was unusual about that. I thought maybe other people thought that too, I guess.
I knew at a very young age I enjoyed female playmates, female companionship.
And then at about 4th, 5th grade, I remember some people were calling me gay, and I didn't know what they meant. And then they said, "You have a boyfriend somewhere." And I was kind of like, why would that be bad?
I can remember feeling differently about the girls in my class in kindergarten. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't know that that was weird until church told me that it was.
And it was kind of that's when it clicked of like, oh God, this is not good. Like how I'm feeling right now is not appropriate. Something's wrong.
The fear I had was that someday someone would find out.
I definitely felt that way in high school. I felt like if people knew, they would not love me anymore.
The stereotypes were universal with everybody. One of the big words was fag or queer, from other kids to anybody they suspected of being more effeminate or different. So it was a struggle. And, you really didn't have any support with teachers or definitely not churches and things like that.
Support where I grew up for the gay community was not there.
It was mind-boggling to see the amount of support for queer people at the last Pride Parade.
We estimate around 4,000 people attended the festival that day based on cell phone data. I'll never forget coming around the corner and seeing the crowd.
There were probably 5,000 people in the streets, and I would say 60 to 70% of these people were heterosexual people with their kids, and they were watching drag performers in the street. And I remember saying to my husband, we were standing there, and I said, if you had told me 40 years ago that I would be standing here watching this, I would have had your head examined.
Back in the 1960s, I always said the gay community was like a secret community. You didn't want anybody to know because back then people weren't normally very acceptable, like employers and things of that nature.
When I first found a good career here, the boss that hired me knew about my lifestyle and my partner, but no one else did.
It was not spoken about, like most people in small towns at that time period. I literally thought my friend and I were the only gay people in the entire world. There were no other people to see. Although there were examples on television stuff, they were often comedic. For example, Paul Lynde on Hollywood Squares would make terribly risque jokes, and it was very clear when you watch it now that he was just as gay as could be. But if you had asked him at that time, he would have said no. Liberace would have said no.
You tried to hide yourself so that you wouldn't lose your job, so that your family wouldn't abandon you, so that your community wouldn't turn on you and expel you from your social life, from your professional life. If you were out, you had very limited possibilities. If you were a hairdresser, if you were a beautician, if you were a stylist, you could have a really solid following. People made a good living. But if you were an executive with a company and you were married to a woman and had children, you cruised Sunset Park.
Sunset Park. Of course, that's been there for many years, and for many years it was a cruisy area, especially down on the levee.
You pulled down the park and you could play tennis, or you sat on the gazebo, or you stayed in your car, and people went up over the top of the levee. At the time, it's not that way today, but it was all trees and bushes with lots of paths.
You could always go up on the levee and walk around or wait or meet people, so to speak.
That probably went on until they cut the trees. As long as the brush was there where people could not be seen, that was always a place.
When you want to find queer history, you have to look up words that are really ugly. And then you can parse through there and see what was going on. As you move through the late 60s, you start seeing articles exposing Sunset Park and other parks as places where gay people congregated late at night. It was illegal in the state of Indiana to be gay until 1977. There was a law that was passed in the 19th century. It basically outlawed any sex act that couldn't result in procreation. Specifically named were sexual acts between men. The first big sodomy case was 1922. It didn't actually happen at Sunset Park, but it was right after that that you find people being arrested under those sodomy laws were almost exclusively at Sunset Park. They were at the 1938 Greyhound bus station across from the Vendome Hotel. There were arrests at the Vendome and at the Union train station. I found something like 75 arrests of men. Only one woman, and that was in that 1922 case, there was one woman that was arrested with 5 men. They were having a really good time.
We used to have lots of secret places like that we would go to, because a lot of that was, again, undercover and out of sight, alleyways, so to speak, and not literally, but could be.
The other place was Garvin Park. I mean, we've heard about Garvin Park, we've heard about Mesker Park. The area around the old post office, that was considered Sissy Corner or the gay cruising area of Evansville for many, many years. There was a park that was behind the old post office that was sunken, where the office buildings are now. There was a basketball court down there, and there was a dark side behind the old post office, and there was a lit side over on the other side. And you get one person to park over on the lit side, and you all lean against their car, and you hang out.
I didn't really spend time. I passed through occasionally, just to see who was hanging out down there. That was always so risky because, me being a teacher, the police had some surveillance of such places, and so you had to be careful just even meeting and talking to somebody.
There were a lot of harassing back then. There were people who were very hateful to gay people. If they thought you were, they would, make fun of you and belittle you.
Even downtown, you would always notice the people. The next block up, you saw the same car. There's not that many cars going around at midnight or 11 o'clock at night. They drive down 2nd Street first and yell, queer, Then you don't know, should you get in your car? They're just driving through. Are they going to stop and hop out? What are they going to do? I've seen people come up and start fighting. There have been many times that somebody got a bloody lip. I lost all the glass of one of my cars down there. We didn't see the people coming, and they had crowbars inside their jackets. So I ran, and somebody was kind enough to stop the car, pushed the back door open, and told me to jump in the car.
Some people did get harmed. Some people were very viciously attacking to people who they suspected.
In the 60s, there were several men who were killed and their murderers were acquitted. The fact that the murdered person was gay and had made sexual overtures to the person that killed them, the jury acquitted them because they felt that that was justifiable homicide. Andrew Reagan was 27. He was murdered on September 22nd, 1954. He was beaten to death with a tire iron, and his body was dumped along Highway 60 on the farm of James C. Ellis, who owned Dade Park, the racetrack. But in his apartment When you read the articles in late 54, they keep referring to a cache of letters that he had carefully kept. It said they were from men all around the country. The media never discussed what was in those letters. There was this purposeful clouding of the publicity that kept people from knowing that he was a homosexual. If they'd come out and said, hey, Andy Reagan was gay, who are the men that he knows here? Who, they could have tried to find people that might have known him. It's still an unsolved murder.
In 1960, I started school at Lockyer's Business College, which was right next to the old YMCA.
And that was another place where gay men found one another, was the old YMCA downtown.
The YMCAs in every community back then was totally gay. If you traveled and you wanted to go to Chicago for a weekend and go to the bars up there and things like that, you'd always stay at the Y. I had friends that were from Jasper, and they had apartments in the YMCA building. So one day I was with one of my friends, and a man had been pushed out of the window of the YMCA, splattered all over the walk.
Jack Burdett was 36 years old, had been a veteran of World War II. Shortly after midnight on November 3rd, 1960, he checked into the downtown YMCA. About 3 in the morning, a man working at Indiana Bell across the street heard breaking glass, and he looked out and he saw a man's body had fallen from the 4th floor window on Vine Street and was on the sidewalk. And there was a street light right there, and he could see that he was bloody. He thought it was a suicide, so he called the police. Police came, retrieved the Jack Burdett, took him to Welborn Hospital, which was open then, and he died about an hour later.
They came in to interview my friend, well, myself too, because I was there, to know if we heard anything, had seen anything, or knew anything about the incident. And we had not.
And it turned out that there was a young man, 21 years old, that had a room across the hall. Holcomb was his name. And apparently he told the detectives that Burdett had invited him over for some drinks about 2 in the morning, and that the two of them had engaged in sexual activity, and he was trying to leave the room. And he said Burdett was pressuring him to do something else, and he felt like the only way he could get out of the room was to knock Burdett out. And when he fought with him, he said he fell out the window. At the trial, Holcomb said that he'd put him in a chokehold, but he'd stuffed 2 large pieces of cloth down Burdett's mouth into his throat so that he couldn't call out. Holcomb told the jury, he said that there'd been robberies in the building and he didn't want Burdett to yell because people might think he was robbing him. So Holcomb was acquitted, because the defense attorney, Howard Sandusky, had made such a powerful defense that a man has the right to fend off a sexual attack from a pervert just like a woman does. And throwing him out the window was the only way he could get away with him, and they acquitted him.
I started off as a deputy prosecutor. January 1st, 1981 would have been my first day. It's hard to remember now because it's so many years ago, but I remember the name Zemer, and I remember people talking about the Zemer case, how the evidence was just so overwhelming, but the jury found him not guilty. So to me, it was in the air. The feeling about gay people at that time would be such that you would know that might be a problem for you if the victim were gay.
Oh, Rudy Zemer. Yes, he was very well known in Evansville and very well known to the entire community as a queer.
He'd been arrested several times for same-sex activity, for sodomy. But on the night of March the 12th, 1963, he was 56 years old. He pulled his car into the old Kentucky barbecue on Kentucky Avenue and had gotten into some sort of a verbal altercation with a table full of GIs that were from Fort Campbell on leave. When Rudy went out to get in his car, these 2 GIs got him in his car, and then another car followed them, had 2 girls in it, and the 4th GI, these 2 that were in Zemer's car, beat him and strangled him with his necktie, took his wallet. They'd left him there in his car and got back into the girls' car that were driving around and had left. And a few minutes later, they realized that their fingerprints were all over this car. So they actually drove back to where they'd left him, got back in his car with him, and then drove it to the levee. The river was over flood stage, and Weinbach Avenue was closed at the levee. So they took his car down and pushed it into the floodwaters, left the engine on and left the transmission in drive, and shut Zemer up in the car. He was still alive, they said, and pushed it 4 feet into the floodwater. It was 2 days later when they found Zemer in his car, and the waitress at the old Kentucky barbecue, she said, well, I know who did it. It was those GIs that he'd been fighting with because they got in his car with him. 3 of them then were charged with his murder. And it was about a year and a half later when the trial happened. Prosecution was able to establish a confession. One of the GIs confessed that he strangled him because he said he kept pawing him, making unnatural advances. They had a trail of evidence. Their fingerprints were there, a confession, the body, the corpus, the car pushed into the floodwaters with the engine running and the transmission and drive. And the jury acquitted all 3. The 3 were tried together. They didn't each have their own trial. Only one of the 3 signed a confession saying that he did violence to Zemer and that he was the one that pushed the car in the floodwaters. And the jury foreman said that since they were tried together, the jury felt they should all have the same verdict. And so they didn't have to pay for that crime. The value of LGBTQ lives at that point was nothing. It didn't matter. Our lives didn't matter. In the case of the 1966 murder of Ken Sanders, an auctioneer, it was a brutal killing. The prosecutor, Kiley, said in an article that he allowed the murderer of Ken Sanders to plead manslaughter because he said, with a jury in Vanderburgh County, there's not a jury here that would convict the murderer of first-degree murder because he said that this man made a pass at him. That's where we were in that 60s and 70s period, was that devaluation of those people's lives. Well, those lives don't really matter. And it wasn't until you got to 1981 with the murder of a young lesbian woman here, Laura Lubehusen, that a jury convicted the killer of a gay person.
I had a friend named Laura Liebehusen, and she was a lesbian in this community who was murdered.
Laura was 28. She's a very pretty girl from Ferdinand.
She was an employee of the Evansville State Hospital. She was a very kind, gentle person. I don't remember ever hearing anybody say anything different.
She loved motorcycles and she loved animals.
We both loved VWs and VW buses. She had one then. I have one now.
She was just a bright, sunny young woman.
She was with a girl named, I think, Darlene.
I had met Darlene through other people. I didn't know her really well, and I'd never met Laura. I wish I had. It was February 1981. These 2 women lived together in a little house on East Tennessee. The house is gone now. There's a repair shop across the street. She had a cat, and her cat had gotten out, and she'd gone across the street and asked these guys that were working in this shop if they'd by any chance seen her cat. They all said no, they hadn't seen the cat, but the one guy, Thomas Shiro, he watched what house she went back into. He was a convict. He was at a halfway house. He'd gone across the street and he knocked on her door and he said, hey, I work across the street. You came over when you were looking for your cat. My car's not running. I need to call somebody to come get me. Can I use your phone? And she said, yeah, you use the phone. And over the course of that night, he tortured her and murdered her. It was horrible what happened to her. The trial was sent to Nashville, Indiana. In this terrible trial, there was this line of defense that she'd had consensual sex with this man, but Darlene testified that indeed it was a rape because Laura was a lesbian and she would not have had consensual sex with any man, let alone this guy. It was one of the first times that this had ever come out in an actual trial publicly. I mean, I think people were kind of shocked by it. But at the end of the day, the jury convicted him of capital murder. The legal ramifications of being a gay person, I think, ended in that 1981 murder of Laura. After that, when a gay person was murdered, it didn't matter whether or not there was any sexuality involved. The jury would consider the murder whether or not the person was gay or not.
I just think a certain part of our society, there are some that are just violent. And the gays are just another one of those subgroups that just feeds that need some people have to torture other people, to bully other people.
It's part of the human condition. I think part of the way that some people are wired is in order to feel good about themselves, they have to feel they're better than someone else. I mean, you look at our politics of today, they're completely based on hatred of the other. We change who the other is all the time. We used to hate all kinds of different people. We hated the Italians, and then we didn't hate the Italians, but then we hated the Irish, and then we didn't hate the Irish anymore, and we had to find new people to hate.
I think what makes people hateful is ignorance.
I blame most of it on ignorance. They have had to learn it from somewhere. They weren't born hating people. Nobody goes with race or religion or anything. I mean, there's just too much of that develops in people.
I did my reality show on CMT, and so I had this national exposure. And that was the only time in my life I ever had death threats for being gay. Somebody that sent me a message on Facebook that apparently I went to school with, he'd seen the commercial on CMT, and he threatened my life over that. There was nothing actually physical, but you take back a second, I have people that are threatening my life just for me being me. That's the one thing I can't understand in this.
People who can hate somebody just because of who they are the scariest people in the world. I'm not scared of monsters. I'm not scared of demons or whatever fictional things, but I am scared of people who don't understand other people and don't accept that other people can exist, because they're dangerous.
I really think it was religion that has caused all this hate.
Some of the most vicious hate I've ever got was from religious people.
I grew up in a very conservative, fundamentalist Christian household. My dad was a pastor.
We were raised very religious, and we had to go to church every Sunday. And usually the church would preach some things that were a bit bigoted.
That was something I think that has always been the hardest part for a lot of gay people, is going to church. You grow up, you go to church, you're sitting there, and you're being told by the preacher that if you do this, you're going to hell. Imagine what that's like, knowing that you're the way you are inside and being told, well, you're going to hell every single Sunday.
I've seen a lot of people that have been tortured with that, feeling like they're living in sin, people rejecting them.
A lot of kids look at magazines or things on the internet, and I was like, is this me? But then I was like, no, because that's not me because of my religion. I was Baptist.
Growing up in a Southern Baptist church, that was a fire and brimstone type of church, where first times that I was ever hearing about homosexuality were in a negative context and it being a sin and something that people go to hell for. When I unpacked or figured out what that definition really was, I knew that I did not need to tell anybody that I had feelings about my girlfriends at school, and that this was something I was never going to talk about, take to my grave.
I definitely knew early on that I could not ask the questions that I needed to ask, because I knew not only would be shot down, but it would probably lead to a really terrible outcome for me.
When I did want to talk to somebody in the church about being gay, I was shut down by an older minister. We just don't talk about that. You'll grow out of it, blah, blah.
I figured I just had to be what society said I had to be.
So that just pushed me further into the closet and pushed a lot of self-loathing and self-hatred onto myself, and I grew up with a lot of shame.
And there were a lot of nights of just crying, praying.
You do lots of praying that please, oh please, let me not be this way.
I don't want to like boys anymore. I need to change. And that was really tough.
Even as I came out, I still thought, you know what? God still loves me. I can still be active in the church. The moment I realized that I probably couldn't reconcile it any longer was I had a friend who I've since made amends with, thought they were doing the good Christian thing by telling our pastor, who actually came to my house and said he wanted to talk to me, pulled me outside, and he started asking very pointed questions, and I don't think I fully answered him, but I was more of a, hey, I still feel like I can be active, and I was pretty blatantly told, no, you can't. In this church, we're a Bible-believing church, and so I was told, you have a week to tell your father, or we will. The elders of the church will get together and we'll tell him, and then we will pray over you publicly in front of everybody in the church. And if this is a life choice,
you choose to continue with, then you're not welcome to worship here anymore. So at that point, I'd come out to my mom. It just kind of came out one day. She caught me off guard talking about relationships, and I accidentally used a he pronoun instead of she, but I was more worried about telling Dad. So I wanted to do that in my own time. I ended up having to tell him during a commercial break in the middle of one of his favorite movies, because we were on day 6 of 7. And if I didn't say anything within the next day, they were going to come to our house and tell him for me. He didn't take it very well at first. It actually, for a period of time, I came to a point where I said, if we can't have a constructive conversation about this without you getting upset about it or angry about it or saying hurtful things, then I won't come back. I said, I have friends in different states that have already offered couches for me to sleep on. I'll figure something out.
Mother divorced my father when I was 1. And when I came out to him at the age of 20, he basically rejected me.
My coming out essentially ended my relationship with my family, my whole family. The relationship was never the same because I could never be considered equal ever again to them.
My parents, they were distraught. They were embarrassed. They were not supportive because what they knew of gay life and gay people were that they were deviants. I never really came out to my parents.
I didn't really feel like I was able to come out whenever I was growing up. Obviously not in high school.
High school, I remember I told someone, hey, I think I'm gay. I thought this person was my friend. They ended up telling everyone the next day. I mean, it was just so ostracizing to be at school and people are looking at you, whispering about you, telling anecdotes and narratives about me doing things, and it was really dark and scary at some points.
I remember my junior year, there was a girl who 100% I had a crush on, and if she's watching this today, she will know I'm talking about her. I did, but I didn't want to admit that, and I wasn't going to admit that. I had a boyfriend. I was not gay, but she told everyone in our junior class that I was. And I'll never forget sitting in the Panera parking lot, having this conversation with my boyfriend where he is like, are you gay? Just tell me. And I'm like, no, I'm not at all. And yes, I was. I was a liar. And
I had to have a girlfriend. It was horrible. And I didn't even ask for her. She just said, we are dating. It was like, oh yeah, we're gonna make you not gay. This is your girlfriend now. And I was like, oh my God. Every week then Valentine's came around, I had to get her flowers and stuff. I emotionally feeling like I was in a relationship, but not like there was zero attraction there, which I feel like a lot of people can sort of relate to.
I went steady with this one boy almost all the way through high school. I knew in high school, but I didn't feel like I could do anything about it. It was a very conservative time, and I was brought up ultra conservative, and that was a sin. Growing up was like everybody did the same thing.
I got married pretty young, I had children, lived the traditional life that was expected of me.
You accept that's just the way it is.
I had gone to college and, had really just 1 or 2 gay experiences, but I told myself I wasn't gay because, that wasn't a normal thing by any means in the 70s. And so I, found a woman that I fell in love with, and we got married, and I was married for 8 years, and we had 2 children.
My ex-husband and I dated from sophomore, junior year, all the way through. We got married in 1983. My then husband was a Southern Baptist deacon. My daughters, Jill and Kay, were Girl Scouts. And I wasn't the leader, but I helped. And there was another mother that helped. And we got along really well. One Sunday afternoon, she came to my house and wanted me to go for a ride with her, and she was telling me she was attracted to me and this and that and the other, and I was not having it because I was raised a preacher's daughter, and this was not right. Not anything really intense happened in that encounter, but it was enough to make me myself see the light.
I started realizing that I was attracted to men and finally accepted that I was gay.
I felt like that I was living a lie, and that wasn't fair to anyone. I told him, and he suggested we go to counseling. I said I wouldn't be opposed to go to counseling. First, he said, why can't we just stay married for the kids, and you can go your way and I'll go mine? And I agreed to that. Briefly. We lived in an old farmhouse. I had to go to town to dry the clothes. I went to town to dry the clothes. Came by a friend of mine, it's a softball friend, and we sat up and talked till like midnight. By the time I got home, he's sitting up waiting for me. Where you been? And I told him if this is what he meant by I go my way and he go his, then I wanted a divorce.
Told her that I was gay, and we divorced.
So by 1988, we were separated, and in 89, the divorce was final. It was very difficult. We had a 2-year-old son at the time. That made it difficult also.
But, you know, once I accepted it, it was such a relief to me.
When I look back and think, oh, did you really have a crush on that person in high school? Yeah, I think I probably did, but I probably was too scared to say anything about it or do anything about it because that was just unheard of.
My friends who did come out in high school, they were often victims of like a lot of bullying.
It was very unwelcoming in school.
Just the everyday things that people throw at you in elementary school and middle school, derogatory terms, calling you a faggot, calling you X, Y, Z. Of course, they're gonna throw the things that they hear running around their house or their community or whatever at you whenever they see something that's just a little bit different.
In like 3rd grade, I had a classmate who had sharpened a stick and stabbed me in the leg. Then I had a classmate, like when I was in high school, stab me in the face with a screwdriver. I had classmates like spitting on me and like dumping sodas on me, scratching things into my car. That was a day-to-day. It could be an hour-by-hour situation in high school.
I may have grown up in this sheltered place because I went to grade school and high school and some college with all the same people from 1965 on. And I have never been face to face with somebody that wanted to abuse me because of who I am. And I know that that's not a common thing. I was the luckiest person, you know, being a white, cisgendered male. I had a lot more privilege.
Oh, absolutely.
I totally agree.
Inherently so, yes.
Unfortunately, that's the world that we live in. I feel like, you know, as a Black transgender man, even if I was a Black cis man, that my voice does not speak as much as in volumes.
The concept of intersectionality comes into play, I think. It depends on how many layers of oppression you have. You know, if you're white, upper middle class, the likelihood of you being oppressed because of your sexuality depended on your family, where you were, where you worked, what your education was. But if you were of a lower socioeconomic group and you were a person of color, or if you were even transgender, you know, you have all those intersectionalities there of those different layers of oppression that were on top of you.
Yeah, like being gay and Black is really hard for me. My sister, she's like, I don't care, but don't force it on me. Like, we still hang out to this day, but my brothers, they're just real strong Black men, and oh, we don't deal with that.
There's a thing in the Latinx community of machismo where it's like the men have to be like really manly men, and like the women have to be like housewives, basically.
I shouldn't be gay because I'm a strong Black man, or I'm your brother, but don't do that around me.
Like, what are you doing? Like, you shouldn't act this way. You shouldn't be doing it this way. Like, you're supposed to be this certain type of person. And it's like, but we're not.
How can I not do it around you? It's me. It's who I am.
I can't imagine being a cisgendered white male just as much as they probably wouldn't be able to put themselves in my shoes. I would say it's so inherently different that you can do nothing but sympathize with what somebody else is experiencing on top of being from the LGBT community. Living in Diamond, Kentucky, we were the only non-Caucasian people that lived in our town. Well, the other people who were persons of color were my brothers and sisters. So it looked as though they had to me, a better experience, but I know like their experience was similar to mine. Me being gay, I just had another level on top of what they were experiencing.
We set up so many ways to differentiate ourselves in our society. Hair color, religion. There are lots of barriers. I didn't have very many of the traditional, I didn't grow up in an evangelical household that told me I was hated. I grew up in a liberal Presbyterian household that told me I was loved.
As far as religion, later on when I was in Columbus and I was raised in a family with my partner, we joined the Presbyterian Church. Seemed to be more welcoming, in my life as far as religion.
Now there's more accepting churches, lots of accepting churches.
Zion United Church of Christ in Henderson was our first really out and open and welcoming church. River City Pride started meeting in First Presbyterian Church because they provided a space. Today we have so many choices here in Evansville when it comes to churches. I can probably think of 5 congregations that are opening, welcoming, and more every day that I don't know the actual number anymore, because I'll see the rainbow on their signs out front and like, oh, I didn't know about that one. When you do have a church that welcomes us, well, there's some people who do not feel comfortable to come into the church.
I distanced myself from the church and eventually found my way completely out of church, and would identify myself as an atheist now. There's not a lot of love there for us, and so why would I want to be someplace that people don't want me?
It took a whole lot of what we call deconstruction to really begin to unpack everything that I've been taught to believe about God, about life, about my humanity. And it took finding First Presbyterian Church, a church who was progressive and open and affirming and inclusive of LGBTQ people, to begin to hear a message about God's love for everyone, including gay people. My mentor and pastor, Kevin Fleming, say the first line of the Presbyterian Confession of Faith, which is, "In life and in death, we belong to God." And there's no if, and, or but to that. A few years ago, I became an inquirer first with the full support of my church and my session and the presbytery. And now I am a 4th-year seminary student, hopefully gearing up for ordination next year. I credit having my own faith with God for sustaining me and helping me to continue to consider that maybe there was still space for me in God's heart.
I still have my personal beliefs, but they're different now, and I keep them very close and personal in my own. It's my thing, it's not anybody else's. My dad didn't take it very well when I came out. It took him a while to come to terms with it, but still, even when he wasn't happy about it, he still stopped going to the church. He didn't like that there was an ultimatum issued, so he stopped doing children's church and eventually just stopped going. And to this day, he doesn't interact with that pastor. Are there still things my dad and I don't see eye to eye on? Absolutely, but we went from not speaking to my dad being one of my best friends and closest relationships that I have.
My mom and I are very close. I talk to her almost every day. My dad and I were very close. Talked to him almost every day before he died. They have begged me for forgiveness for the way things happened, and I never didn't forgive them. I was the one who was always still showing up, taking my son to their house on the weekends so that he could visit, even though they didn't really want me around. I knew somewhere in there, if I kept being the one to show up and show them unconditional love, that eventually it would come full circle, and it did.
I think the best thing that ever happened was my old physician who was retiring. He had an appointment with my mom or my dad, but they were both there, and as he was saying goodbye, because it was going to be the last visit, they said, "Hey, we're just curious, if you're gay, are you born that way?" And I don't know that he used this language, but he basically said, "This is my last day." Yes, you are born that way. He's like, your son was born that way. He's like, this is not something that he chooses to do.
I've had to tell this to a few people who have asked me, well, it's a choice. You're choosing a lifestyle. Even as a little kid, you're indoctrinated of this is a choice. You're doing this. Why would I choose a lifestyle that is going to be harder for myself?
Why would I pick this? Why would I pick a life where I have to worry about if I'm going to get jumped walking out of a gay bar?
The internet sort of killed gay bars around the country. When I was 25, if I wanted to try and meet people, if I wanted to try and date, I had to go out.
This was before you could Google a list and say, hey, we're meeting over at Betty's house.
And I had a friend tell me that the first time he came to Evansville, I don't know, 1955, he didn't know where to go to find other gay people. And so he flagged down a police car and asked the policeman, hey, where do homosexuals go here? And they told him a couple of different bars to, go after midnight, and that's where you'll find them. One of them was a bar called the Blue Bar. That's where he said to go. So he said, that's where I went.
When I first came out, of course I was very young, but I went to the Blue Bar down in the basement of the Lincoln Hotel. And I looked very young, but it didn't give me any trouble. The front half was what we called straight. The back half was gay. But the official gay bar back when I came out was the choral room of the McCurdy and then the town room of the Vendome. But the town room at the Vendome was where I went all the time. It was a mixed bar, not totally gay, but a lot of gay people went there. We had piano bars there. We'd sing and carry on, and that lasted quite a while until they tore the Vendome down. And then there were several gay places.
There was a bar at 3rd and Sycamore called the Hawaiian Village that was a queer space, sort of on the QT late at night.
Then there was a restaurant called Grandma's Cooking or something, and they were owned by gay people, and we would go to those.
There were different places in town, but you had to be on the right wavelength. You had to meet somebody who knew what it was. But it wasn't until Hal's Steakhouse opened in 1968 that there was a defined queer space that everyone knew what it was. That empty lot where the Lloyd Expressway meets Fulton Avenue is where it was. As a young teenager, we used to go to Pete's Supper Club for dinner periodically, which was down the road. And driving down Division Street, you would see drag queens standing outside of Hal's Steakhouse. So I knew that was a queer space, but I was too young to go, and I didn't fully understand the importance of queer spaces at that time.
Queer spaces are important, and that's such a funny word.
I'm not overly comfortable with the word queer or lesbian yet, but I'm getting better.
Queer was a slur. Queer was a very bad thing to hear. It took me a while to get accustomed to that word being reclaimed. Only within the past maybe a couple of years have I become comfortable myself saying it, because I heard it as a slur yelled from cars.
Queer spaces are places where you're protected.
It was your space where you felt the most comfortable in, that nobody's going to attack you or talk against you while you're inside the space. You can be you, and you're seeing other people like you.
I think we all want to be around people that are like us. I think that's just a human nature type thing.
Anthropology shows that animals need to be amongst their own kind to thrive.
Especially when you're new at coming out, finding other people that are going through the same experience.
That's what the gay bar was. It was a place where you could go, you could dance with other men, you could socialize with people just like you, and just be who you wanted to be.
You can be a drag queen for a night, you can be a drag king for the night, you can be the most popular person in the space for a while.
It's a place where you just feel safe and secure and you feel a part of. Even though outside of there, I felt different, very different.
Gay bars and queer spaces like that, they were where you could gather to have, especially during the AIDS epidemic, you could have celebrations of life for people that passed away when their family wouldn't have a funeral for them.
This was a community center. If the local gay organization had an event going on, I announced it, on the stage. We had a newsletter for many, many years. We'd bring stacks of newsletters to the bar. If I had somebody who asked me what was going on, I'd say, here. That's how we got our message out.
In trying to form some sort of organized queer life in your city, if there are no queer spaces, if there's no organization of gay life, where do they go to have community? 75 years ago, you just had to wander around aimlessly until you ran into somebody. Today, Pride has meetings. In the old days, groups met at Swing and Door or we met at someplace else.
My first bar that I went into was called the Cabaret. The Cabaret was just a beer and a wine. club, and they had drag shows, and that's where I found my first drag show. After the cabaret was Swinging Door.
Swinging Door is the one we went to the most.
Oh my gosh, that was like the place.
In the late 70s, it was 1979, a group of us that weren't 21 yet used to go over there on Saturday night and sit outside and listen to the music. Someone that I knew drove up, was going to be in a drag show that night, and pulled up and said, "Why are you sitting out here?" I said, "Well, I'm not 21. I don't have an ID or anything." And he said, "Come with me." So he took me inside and introduced me to Norma Black, who was the wife of the owner. She was sort of the quasi-mother hen of the bar. And he introduced me and he said, he's 21, but he doesn't have his ID with him. But I'll vouch for him. And so, she called Jim Black over, the owner. And so told my friend, he said, "Well, you're responsible for him if he causes any trouble." And so then after that, I was in.
By 18, I was going into our local bars illegally.
I remember coming to one of the gay bars in Evansville. I think the bar was called the Swinging Door. And I wasn't 21 yet, but I got in.
We were sitting there celebrating my 21st birthday. And Norma taps me and says, "Didn't we celebrate your 21st birthday last year?" And somebody at the table says, "And the year before?" Jim says, "Let me see your ID." I said, "Well, Jim, I'm 21 now." He says, "Thank goodness." You can never ask for anybody who's more supportive than Jim and Norma Black.
I just remember going in, and it was dark, and it reminds me so much of that way I thought of my life. It retained that smallness.
The bar itself was small and, had a dance floor.
Swing Door had a stage that when the drag queens weren't performing, the DJ was, playing the disco, we danced.
The DJ was a beautiful man named Mike Wilson, who was a very good friend of mine. He would get the latest artists of the day, Donna Summer, Lips Inc., Cher. He would get the club cuts, they called them. And that's what young people wanted to hear. I had friends that were straight, but on occasion they would come to the bar with me because that's where the really good music was.
There were straight people that came there too for the music.
There were certain records back then that you didn't hear on the radio. Radio around here was really pretty bad. We're so close to Louisville and St. Louis. People would leave here. They didn't want to be seen out, because you could still get fired for just being, seen in the wrong place at that point in time. So people would go to St. Louis, they'd go to Louisville, they'd hear songs, they'd come back, you'd hear about them. So I made it west to find this music, and I would go to Indianapolis and go through the import record stores in Louisville. I had a quest where I actually went to San Francisco to find a record called Boom Boom Boom, Let's Go Back to My Room by Paula Kakis.
It was so much fun. There was just a lot of dance and a lot of cheer, a lot of laughter, and a lot of drinking.
I met my first partner there, made a lot of friends there over the years. To really meet people regularly, the bar was the place. And particularly gay men went to the bar, but a lot of lesbians attended too.
Men seemed more comfortable being out for some reason. Women that were professional anyway, I think, were more private about that.
A lot of people did not want to be out.
A lot of us were not drinkers or bar people.
And we couldn't stay up till 3 a.m. anymore. So if we wanted to get together outside of the bar, a lot of us were athletes, so we'd see each other, in our athletic world. But a lot of us would just start visiting in each other's homes.
Lesbian women got together in their homes all the time. There would be little parties of 12 or 14 women.
A lot of the people that were not exactly bar people made their own circles of friends. And we formed a group called the SOBs. We had meetings. Each one of us would take our turn. And we had a party every month at a different person's house. And the furthest away someone came was from Huntingburg.
We would go do a lot of things in groups and together.
There was a restaurant out on the west side, a stucco house. And we used to all go from USI out there and have drinks. And there was a pool table.
We used to have bowling teams, and I think we still do.
Sundays were volleyball day at Westlands Park.
The volleyball games, those started just among individuals. Some of us who hung out the bars wanted something to do on a Sunday afternoon because the bar wasn't open or something, and we'd get together at Westland Park. It probably started in 83, 84. It kept growing, and there would be times there would be 40 and 50 people out there. Mostly it was gay men, but then Several lesbians, came.
It was just a casual thing. It was if you weren't too hungover from the night before going out partying, or you were underage, it was just a great place to get together and have, fun for a couple of hours.
The group did get, like I say, fairly large. Some were more flamboyant than others, and I'm sure people who drove by or walked by in Westland Park, realized that was a gay group playing volleyball.
I mean, you get the occasional harassment from somebody, they'd see a bunch of people, but there were women there too, so it probably had to be confusing. It was just a fun time, and you didn't have a whole lot of places for, if you were underage, to go and meet people. Swinging Door closed 3 or 4 months after I turned 21, so I only went there once or twice.
Then bars started sprouting up. They would open and stay open a couple years and close, or change names or something.
There was the other side on Morgan Avenue.
Whatever you want to call it, changed names 3 or 4 times. Club East, the other side 2, the other side 3.
That was the bar that I started working at. It was this great big old dumpy building. I think it had been called the Wagon Wheel before. You had your main front room, and then there was a back room, which was the show bar, where they did the drag shows and strip shows.
Johnny was the owner of that. Again, a straight man, rough, carried a little pistol on him all the time. Very seldom was ever there when the bar was actually open. Huge space. Johnny kept on adding on to it. He keeps mysteriously having fires where he would build a new space. My best friend was the doorman. I can remember 800 people coming through there on a Halloween. I don't care what anybody says, Halloween's a big gay holiday. And the reason Halloween's a big gay holiday is you can dress up as whoever you want and nobody knows who you are.
Club East stayed until 93 or 4, I think. After Club East, there was the show bar. The show bar is the one we always talked about that Madonna, wrote on the wall there.
So in 1991, we were filming A League of Their Own in Huntingburg and then later Evansville. Show bar had opened up, and that was on East Franklin. And we were right down from the Columbia office where they were doing some of the filming. Madonna came in one night. I worked on the film. I actually had a scene with Madonna that day. I am just anxious to get to the bar and tell all of my friends, you will not believe what happened to me today. And I get in there, and Jenny Nix says, hey, can you start DJing? I'm looking over and she says, oh yeah, Madonna's here. Jenny Nix was not always the easiest person in the world to get along with. She was a bail bondsman. She ran the door. She charged Madonna cover, and everybody in the bar was like, how in the world could you charge Madonna, one of the most famous people in the world, cover? And she'd look at it, she'd say, can she not afford it? And it's, well, you got a point there. So Madonna paid for her whole entourage to come in. A little bit later on, Penny Marshall and a lot of the other Peaches and crew came. Penny Marshall hung out in the DJ booth with me.
Everybody came from the movies, and our organizations made a lot of money thanks to them.
There were other short-term bars around, the old Woody's at the corner of Main and the Lloyd. Tina Fey's.
It had to have been 99, 2000 that Scotty's opened up. Scotty's was the first time that we had a gay bar that was actually owned by gay people.
There was a couple others that were a little bit more seedy. I can't remember what it was called, but I know at one point they changed its name to the Slipper Inn on Kentucky Avenue. I just remember that because everybody would kind of said, it's kind of a gross name.
When I was in college, there was the Brick House. That's the first place that I went to for a drag show. I tipped my first drag king there.
Someplace else, the longest staple.
Someplace Else, which is the only remaining gay bar in Evansville.
Someplace Else, back before it was a gay bar, was a popular eating lunch place. I mean, judges and lawyers would go there because it was so close to the courthouse. And when Ellen made the decision to turn it into a gay bar, her day business just dropped a lot of backlash from the straight community. The lawyers and the judges, they stopped. She stopped doing lunches. And it struggled the very beginning, but she stayed with it.
I love that we have a place that people can go and be free to dance and be who they are.
I never had any problems at any of those bars, but sometimes I think they did, maybe outside. Not so much inside.
I do remember coming out of the bar a time or two, and vehicles driving down Maryland Street would yell at people coming out of the bar and, fag and things like that.
Every so often you would have a pickup truck with boys with baseball bats that would come and circle around the block.
We called them the beaters because they would come around, maybe have too much liquor or just not like us, and they would come around and they would find people to beat up. Some people were reluctant to report it because they didn't want people to know of their lifestyle.
There was a small group of people got together and formed an organization called the Tri-State Alliance to try and combat this violence.
In 1982, I was delivering some flyers to the swinging door. I took them in and started to go back out, and I thought, that's not enough. And I was talking to some people, and they were about to leave, and I was about to leave, but I stepped back in, and I laid the flyers on the bar. And when I stepped out, there were people that were attacking my friend. A man had broken a beer bottle and went after my friend, and he said, "Suck on this," and he cut his teeth out.
That's how we were treated for many years.
And that was, to a large degree why I hid for so long.
I went to see about my friend in the hospital, and I just kept thinking, what can I do? What can I do? I talked to some folks, and I said, we need to start a meeting. And a few people did come forward. The community was very angry. The first meeting we actually had at the bar because that's where people went. But I still didn't feel like that was enough. And I was telling my hairdresser, and she said, my brother is on the police force, Lieutenant Larry Qualls. I went to Larry, and I met with him a few times, and I brought him out to Tri-State Alliance, and he met with us. At that particular point in time, that was a godsend because people were actually taking us seriously and trying to help that situation.
So in the early 80s, gay people were on just the cusp of acceptance in places like Evansville. It was about that time. Joycelyn Winnecke wrote a really long article in May of 1981, and it was called Gays Existing in a Straight World. We were all anxious to read this article, and I remember going to brunch. There were about 10 of us that all went to brunch, and every one of us brought our Sunday paper so we could read this article by Joycelyn Winnecke. I think it opened a lot of people's eyes that weekend that, your neighbors that are hiding from you, they're no threat to you. They're just trying to live their life. And it was only a month or so later when we started hearing about this gay cancer on the coasts.
I remember reading in the paper about places like New York, San Francisco, of men, and they would talk about them being gay men having these lesions on their legs, and then they were starting to die.
I realized I was gay and came out as gay to family in 1981, the first year that, AIDS was diagnosed in the U.S. anyway, in New York City.
The 41 cancers they found in these men, and it was in the gay community.
At first, we didn't even know what it was.
We were all wondering what this is.
Nobody knew how it worked. It was like how COVID, when it first started, nobody knew how it worked. And so, if you touch somebody, if you get AIDS, if you ate with a fork or something that they had touched, you would get AIDS.
You were worried that if you touched a doorknob. You were worried if you sat on a toilet seat. You were worried if you touched a gay person.
Because they thought every gay man had this. They didn't want to touch you. They didn't want to hug you. They didn't want to use the bathroom after you.
Of course, looking back, it's like, no, it's not the way it works at all.
As time went on, they knew more about it, and they figured out the main form of transmission and all of that. And then when they knew what it was, you became very uneasy about meeting people and having any sexual contact.
When that happened, a wall got built in me. Okay, I'm making friends. I'm not doing anything sexually because I didn't want to die that way.
There was some safety of being in a city like Evansville or Champaign-Urbana, where I went to college, because there was a very small gay community. At that time, most gay people did what I did, which was as soon as you were done with college, left. And so there just weren't a lot of folks here. And there was some safety with that.
It really didn't affect anyone that I knew in Evansville until about 85.
I think the first case was 1985, and then the first death was right around there.
Then sort of made its way through town.
You'd go to the bar and you would hear, oh, so-and-so is sick.
It was almost like every time you turned around, somebody you knew was going to be HIV positive.
People that were close friends with, I had probably 15 that were positive, and they were devastated because it was a death sentence at that time.
I was working at Welborn Baptist Hospital as an intensive care nurse. As patients started to come in, they were probably the sickest individuals any of us had ever taken care of, simply because Every body system was affected.
At the beginning, if you were diagnosed, you had about 1.5 to 2 years to live. There was no drug treatments yet. There wasn't anything you could do.
It was horrifying because you knew the guys that you loved and you were close to in the community were very high risk.
All of my friends are deceased. The people that I used to work with, that I hung out with, we were the same type of people, drag queens, transsexuals. Pretty much all of them are deceased.
One after another, people that you know, people that you knew, people that you would see at the bar, one after another would die.
There were a few people, I won't mention names, but you'd see them, gorgeous guys, muscular, beefy, just gorgeous, and find out they had AIDS, and 6-7 months later, they'd be dead.
My brother was 9 years younger than me. He realized at an early age that he was gay and that he did not want to stay in southern Indiana and live. He got an opportunity to go with J.C. Penney and go to Pompano Beach, Florida. And so he lived in the Fort Lauderdale area for 3 or 4 years. But that's apparently where he got infected with HIV. He was diagnosed in '87, had a couple of good years, but then started getting worse. And like he told me, he felt like he was losing his mind because some of the medicines that they were giving and then were just really had terrible side effects and such. So in '89, he wanted to basically come home to die. I was going to go down to visit him to talk about him coming back, and the night before I arrived in Fort Lauderdale, he decided he would just end it all, and that would be the best thing. So he actually attempted suicide by overdosing. So I, got to his apartment, and he was alive, but he was, he had thrown up the medications and such, and he was just in a bad shape. Luckily, he survived that, but, he just kind of went downhill quick in the next 6 months and passed away in January of 1990. It was hard for my family because some people in my family were not accepting of him or me for being gay. I was the only one who really offered him a home to stay in. I had 2 or 3 siblings that came and helped and visited with him and such. And Dad tried to be supportive, but he was also, I think, ashamed because he didn't want anyone to know that my brother Dennis had AIDS. He, just told people he had cancer.
It wasn't cancer. They have cancer. Even some of the obituaries in the paper would not say that they had passed away from HIV.
I think it was just the mindset of society at that time that it was only affecting gay people at first in great numbers.
There was a whole community of people in the Midwest that really believed it was a gay man's disease. They didn't believe that it was a health-related issue that could happen to anybody. They believed it was brought in by gays and it was spread by gays.
And all the hate that came from that. I was 19 years old, living in Dallas, Texas with my aunt. People would pull up in cars with baseball bats down there and want to beat the hell out of the people at the bar. The bar that I worked at got firebombed. And that was the time I came back home because I was not going to die in Dallas, Texas. It was a little bit better in Evansville because a lot of people didn't know a lot of the gay community here because everyone was closeted. Not me. Of course, not me. I have a natural swish to my walk. And I could be Jerry walking down the street and someone see me from behind and then they realize that I'm a man. Well, I got called a lot of names. They would say, oh, you AIDS, you deserve what you get. You're going to hell. This is God's punishment on you.
It was God's retribution of the sinful behaviors that gay people engaged in that were against biblical principle. And that this is just the punishment that you got for being in Sodom and Gomorrah.
And it wasn't just gay people that were getting it.
There were a lot of intravenous drug users, a lot of people of color, a lot of other communities, but they weren't the face of the AIDS crisis.
We were the people that got hit hardest and hit first.
And I think a lot of people didn't care about it as much because it affected what they thought was the other.
There was a lot of scare, even in the healthcare industry back then, and a lot of judgment.
Doctors didn't want to treat it. Nurses didn't want to treat it.
That's really when nurses that I worked with started saying, I don't want that assignment. I don't want to take care of 3. Sadly, the hospital kind of tolerated it, I believe, because we didn't know very much about the virus, and they were kind of scared as well of, well, what if we make these nurses take care of these folks and they get the virus?
There was also a great desire not to help people, not to invest, not to spend a lot of money.
Even Ronald Reagan, who was president until 89, didn't even mention the word AIDS.
Ronald Reagan would not talk about it. And, and that's a perfect example of why the speed was slowed, because there were just a lot of leadership that could not bring themselves to acknowledge the problem or talk about the problem because it was an uncomfortable subject.
There was no help anywhere. Hospice was still afraid to take care of them. Nursing homes wouldn't take them as they declined. Families didn't want to take care of them. So what do you do?
The government wasn't helping. You had groups that had formed, like the AIDS Resource Group, that tried to find resources.
TSA had been meeting a while when the AIDS crisis hit, and I went to Millie Canola of the health department. She came and she talked. She made sure we were always kept up on the news. Out of this first group came the AIDS Resource Group.
The AIDS Resource Group started to try and make people as comfortable as possible and marshal resources to keep people housed, to keep people solvent, to maintain their life in some fashion as they progressively got sicker and sicker.
A lot of times you would lose an immense amount of weight with AIDS and you didn't have the money because if you were paying for a medication, your insurance didn't cover it. And you might go from a size large to a size small in just a couple of months. So there were clothing drives, there were food drives.
Zion United Church of Christ started a friendly visiting program to where members of the congregation, I would train them on what we knew at the time about HIV and how to protect themselves. And we would go and visit, we would help pay bills, we would go get groceries, we would sometimes help them bathe, whatever they needed as they deteriorated. About the same time, I became aware of the internet to where I could really search out and find things. I found out about the Ron White program, which was federal funding established for people with AIDS. So I wrote a planning grant, and we actually got the grant, which gave me a salary to leave my job and throw myself into this work. Zion United Church of Christ had a garage building in the back that they used for storage, and we cleaned it all out, and my dad, with some volunteers, we turned that garage into a 1-exam room clinic. And that's where Matthew 25 got its start. ARG existed. They provided case management services and prevention services. And so, Matthew 25 tried to, with our federal funding, we brought in the medical care, the laboratory, the ability to access medications and pay for them. There was just a lot of needs. And I think by us being able to join together with what resources we had here, we were able to create a nice patchwork quilt of everything that they needed.
I think there was a rallying together during that time, and I think the heterosexual community, the ones that advocated for inclusion, realized we have to start talking about sex.
That whole thing about safe sex and educating the gay community about safe sex, about condoms.
Safer sex was a thing that we promoted, and we did seminars in the bars and such like that.
We started buying more condoms to pass out at bars.
The bars eventually had tubs of condoms and safe sex kits to pass out. A lot of the drag shows that we did were fundraisers.
There was a group called the Beehives. They were the original benefit show girl troupe. Maybe it would be Matthew 25 one weekend, and then the next month maybe it would be ARG, and they'd do a benefit show, and all the entertainers that they had in the show, any tips that they got would be donated to the cause.
We are so indebted to that group of men. They no longer exist today. There's a few of them that are still alive. They were the ones who got us through AIDS because they would literally don on their dresses or whatever they wanted to wear that night and spend the whole night raising money, and whatever money they raised went straight to the emergency funds to help people in need.
It was in 1993, Sam Ryan passed away. His parents were George and Martha. They owned Ryan Oil. John Streetman, not only was he a brilliant director of the museum, but he was a brilliant composer. He'd written a whole book of music. And so the Ryans underwrote for ARG a fundraising compact disc album of John's songs. And John was able to convince Harry Gray and Tim Ewing and Bill McKinley, who were very well-known singers. Tim Ewing was appearing on Broadway at the time, to record his music on this CD. John put together this premiere party for his CD. I can remember Randy Dennison, myself, and some of the board members. We had a table set up at the museum. We were unsure that anybody would come. You know, who's going to pay $50 a couple to come to the museum in this town for a fundraiser for AIDS? We didn't think anybody was going to do it. So we were sitting there at this table, and everybody started coming in. Lloyd Winnicky, Carol McClintock, people my parents knew. The place was packed.
Oh my God, there was probably 100 people there at that time. I couldn't believe what I saw, so much support. And I knew it was because the Ryans were behind it. You had these gay people's parents now. Same with substance use disorders, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. When the mother gets up, she becomes a zealot and other people listen to her. The Ryans were well known here, heterosexual, 6 kids, so people listened to them. It was probably the first huge event done here in Evansville where the heterosexual community got involved.
It raised $16,000 or $17,000, which was a lot of money. And then we started the AIDS Walk in '93, and the first year was really small. April Mitchell, who was part on Channel 14, her brother had died, and she attended an AIDS Walk in another city. And so she brought that concept here. The second year, 1994, again, you're unsure about who's going to show up, how many people would be there. But that second AIDS Walk, the downtown was jammed with people. Fraternities, sororities, high school groups had worked to raise money through the year for this AIDS Walk. It raised 1/10 of our entire budget.
I think if you ask any social justice movement, the social justice movement will only often be successful when allies outside of the movement join. That had a lot to do with the change in attitude eventually.
That helped a lot. Heterosexuals too. Elizabeth Taylor started coming out.
I give a lot of credit to people like Elizabeth Taylor and prominent folks in Hollywood and other places that put their credibility on the line to support the gay community in ways that were not helpful for their careers.
Elizabeth Taylor was very instrumental back in those days. She raised a lot of money, as I remember.
Celebrities have a lot of influence.
When somebody like Rock Hudson, who was one of the first famous people to get it.
Rock Hudson, of course, was the first celebrity that died of complication of AIDS that he admitted that that's what it was. And I think that influenced a lot. It also shocked a lot of people because they just couldn't believe that he was gay.
When it's an intravenous drug user who's going to the gay bar down the street, people didn't care as much. But when Rock Hudson or Liberace or Dak Rambo, who was on Dallas.
Halston was somebody that lived here in Evansville. He was somebody that left a mark on fashion and trends.
And then Ryan White, who was an innocent boy.
He went through so much. Imagine being a kid, a hemophiliac, and that was how he got it through a blood transfusion.
He was like in 6th or 7th grade, I think, when he first was diagnosed in northern Indiana, and his school district wouldn't allow him to attend school, even though doctors said it would have been safe.
Just imagine what that would have been like, going to school and nobody wanting to sit near you or being teased.
I was fortunate enough to hear him speak about the topic. He just advocated for people to talk about it and to be accepting and do what's right and treat it as any other disease and get away from the stigma and work to cure it.
Ryan White was very instrumental in getting funding people coming to the realization that this is something that we have to do.
If it wasn't for Ryan White, HIV care and AIDS care in this country would not be where it's at. So we have a lot to be thankful for that little Indiana boy.
It was about 10 years into the epidemic when the government kind of stepped in to help.
In the early 90s, we had AZT, which was one of the first medications that we actually had.
People could do that and they might live 6 months longer than what they would have without it.
AZT caused lots of side effects. It eventually, over years, killed people's kidneys. But it wouldn't just be that they had to have. Every system they had was failing. So they would be on so many medications, not just their HIV medicines. Their CD4 counts were in the toilet, so they had to be on antibiotics, many times several antibiotics.
That was a bag of pills that they would carry on their hip. I mean, my friends, when we'd go out and do stuff or I'd go visit or whatever, they would always have a MRS, call them a MRS, and it was just full of all these pills that would make them sick and bloat up.
I think sometimes the AZT was worse than what they were going through with the AIDS. People were throwing up. They were having, diarrhea.
But it got them through. Oh, it's a lot better today because you can be undetected and, go out and live a full life now.
Now, people can come in the clinic and get 2 injections every 2 months and be good to go. It's amazing to me to see somebody going from many times 30 prescriptions to now 2 injections. I mean, that's just great.
Even today, it's not normalized. You don't have people running around saying, "Oh, I'm gay and I have AIDS." It's not something anybody's, I guess, proud of.
But it just isn't what it was in the 1980s. In the 1980s, it meant you had a year to live.
We lost a lot of people in Evansville to AIDS through the years.
As I think back to when we sat in that room and we wrote the bylaws, a lot of those people were gone because of AIDS. I can see them in the room. I can see everyone that was sitting in that room back then. I could name them.
I had an address book that I had started in 1983, and I counted up the other day that I have more than 40 names of friends that I knew during the 80s and early 90s, and they have died of AIDS.
And it's just unfortunate. No one got excited about it or really worried about it until it started affecting other than gay men. That whole period, there was this amelioration maybe of how people looked at gay people.
The AIDS epidemic, was a setback, I think, but that also was a catalyst to make people aware that there are so many LGBTQ people out there. Otherwise, they had been closeted, and a lot of people just weren't aware.
I think it goes back to what Harvey Milk said, that if gay people want the rest of the world to recognize them as human and see their humanity, you have to come out.
We all know queer people, whether we like it or not. And as we start realizing, my brother's gay, my sister's a lesbian, my cousin is trans, how can I hate my brother? How can I say that my sister is evil or, my cousin is mentally ill? That's when the shift happens.
After a while, people started to slowly accept, and the internet helped with that because the internet opened people's eyes to there's a whole wide variety of people out there.
I mean, you could Google anything now and find anything gay.
Of course, people love to say the media is trying to shove it down your throats, but I like that over time, thanks to movies, thanks to TV shows, it did kind of start opening that door for that slow progression of acceptance.
Before, if there was a gay character in a movie, well, that character always died at the end.
Or the comic relief, usually, or the tragic person who dies.
I'm sure a lot of Hispanic folks hate seeing themselves portrayed only as gang members. I imagine African-American folks are really tired of some of the portrayals until recently of that community. I really got tired of seeing how many times it turned out the reason I was the murderer was because I was gay.
But I think as the 80s moved along, you had movies coming out that were like Personal Best, Partners, Ryan O'Neal. You had gay characters in movies.
It seemed like that became the thing to do. We have to put a gay character in this sitcom, or we got to put a gay character in this play.
I remember some of the important milestones. When I was in college, for example, Dynasty. was a very big soap opera. They had a gay character, but they kept making him not gay. He'd be gay for like 6 episodes, then they'd kill his boyfriend and make him marry one of the women on the show. And they could just never commit to let the poor guy be gay. I remember they had a gay character on a show called Melrose Place in the 90s. That show was nothing but all these young people hooking up. He was the only one that never got a date. He didn't get to kiss anybody. He didn't get to have a date. But, Heather Locklear had a different boyfriend every week.
It was around that time also, wasn't it, that Ellen came out? That started conversations too, because I vividly remember sitting at someplace else when that happened, the night that show came on, because we had a viewing party. And the bar was packed because Ellen's coming out.
And then when 2009, when RuPaul started his show and made drag and the gay community seen on national television, Will and Grace was a big help with that.
That show was so witty and so well written, and the characters were so richly drawn. It achieved a certain level of social importance because of the fact that it put forth the lives of regular gay people and present them as successful and competent and witty and smart. To have a show that successful based on gay characters was something that was very important. And I think it was why today, you can turn on a Station 19, a procedural about a firehouse, and they have gay characters. They have gay characters who get married, and they have gay characters that break up, and they have gay characters that put fires out, and they have gay characters that make the meal for the other firemen. Normal characters who just happen to be gay, or happen to be, by the way, Black, or Hispanic, or Asian, or women in positions of power.
Representation matters.
When you're seen, a person like me is seen on TV or something positive in the news other than the negative, people look at that and say, okay, well, it's not that bad. So I think that's where it got easier because it started getting more mainstream in the 90s and 2000s.
When I moved back to Evansville in 2005, I remember one of the first things I said to the realtor. I asked her if she would be comfortable representing 2 gentlemen, and she said, "Is your money green?" And I thought, well, that's some progress.
A lot of friends you could be in New York, you could be in San Francisco, you could be in Chicago, Austin, you could be in Paris or London. And they're right, I could be. But I want to be here in Evansville. And a part of that is being gay here is a radical act. Being in New York and being queer, you walk down the street and everyone's queer. In Evansville, being queer is radical to show people that we exist. We do exist in New York and San Francisco, but we also exist here.
I made a very specific decision when I moved back, and there are a lot of my colleagues that are also gay or lesbian. We all make very specific decisions to lead our lives in ways that aren't just not hidden, but are in fact quite exposed. I try to MC any event I can do. I try to do that because I want every young man and young woman in this community to see themselves, and to see themselves not the way I was taught that I would have to be a nurse or a florist, that there were no roles for me to be the head of a bank. There was no way I could be a doctor or a lawyer. In fact, that's why I left. I moved to California for nearly 20 years because of the perception I had that there wouldn't be a place for me here.
I really thought I am going to be the only gay person in Evansville. No, that is not true. There's many of us.
I don't think there are more gay people now than there were in the 90s. I just think that there are more people who feel safe enough to be themselves or feel unapologetically about who they are.
I also think that being an out person who's been more vocal has helped embolden other people to say, I'm an ally. I think y'all are great. How can I be supportive? So it's also empowered more people to come forward and to be more open about their support.
I think social media helps, that they can find outside of their own world.
We really saw kind of a rise in the population of the gay culture here in Evansville once social media started coming into play.
I want to say the shift was marriage equality.
Being able to get married? Oh my gosh.
In 2015, Supreme Court decision with Obergefell, it was a shift and it felt huge.
It's been a long 5 years for this Kentucky couple. Today is the day Ashley Burden and Christina Johnston say they've been waiting for. A friend called with the news of the Supreme Court's decision this morning.
I started crying and I woke her up and I was like, we can actually get married now. You know, we can be a married couple.
I remember that day. I remember getting the rainbow flag down off the house and swinging it around like a Les Mis scene out in the front yard, just crying and yelling and cheering.
All I do remember is waking up, hearing the news, and being dumbfounded. I mean, completely and utterly just silent, because that was not something I ever expected to see happen in my lifetime. That was the big thing that said, hey, these people exist and they deserve human rights.
It changed my life because I got to be a part of society that was always allowed to do that, because that's mainstream society, right? Getting married, living a life, happily ever after, that kind of thing, which I didn't think I would ever have a happily ever after.
Some just went out and got married right away.
Some people jumped on the bandwagon with that and got married too quick because a lot of them have been divorced.
A lot of people were going out and just getting married just because they could, or getting married because they were afraid they'd be taken away the next day and they wanted to at least say that they did. And I remember posting something about, like, let's take this very seriously. This is a big step. This is not going on a date. This is not saying I love you. This is a huge, huge step in queer culture in America, is that we can get married now. I don't want to take that for granted.
I have not yet had an interest in a legal representation of my partnership that I've been with for 22 years.
It doesn't change anything for us, whether we have a piece of paper. We know what we are.
We don't feel a need to legalize it, but I like that we can if we want to.
I have never been married, but I certainly would consider it.
That's kind of one of the goals in life that I have that I've not really achieved. My dad wants to officiate his gay son's wedding sometime, and he's technically an ordained Southern Baptist minister, which is why I hope I can find somebody before he dies, because I would like him to do that. The other goals they have would just be perks. And that's one that I have, is to find somebody, settle down, and I want my dad to officiate it, just like he did my brother's wedding.
I definitely think marriage equality was the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, people saw that the fabric of the world, did not disappear.
The sky didn't fall, and bakers sold more cakes, and people got to buy more bad, cheap crystal. All it proved is everybody just wants to do the same thing.
That shift, was very prominent, especially thinking about getting into college in 2009 and thinking to myself, I have to be careful with who I tell I'm gay. And then graduate school in 2017, it's like, who gives a shit? It was like everyone was on the bandwagon of like, gay people are okay. They're cool.
In Evansville, maybe it took us a little bit longer than it did places like LA or New York to come to that realization that, gay and lesbian people can be part of your community and you don't have to be afraid of them.
I think people just slowly, they've gotten so used to seeing it that over time it's just become more and more accepted. Does that mean that the fight is over? Hell no.
Do we still experience discrimination and persecution? Absolutely. Has our house been vandalized 3 times? Our pride flag and flagpole been ripped off of our house? Yeah.
I know somebody that 6 or 7 years ago, they were beat up coming out of a bar, not even a gay bar, but just because they were very effeminate.
I was at the fireworks last night, walking down the crowd. Somebody said something real derogatory, and it was like, really? This is what you're teaching your children, to holler out at people that are different.
There's the other people who ban drag queens,
The drag controversy over the library and reading to kids and such generated a lot of press and controversy.
It was quite a show, actually. The Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library wanted to host a drag queen story hour.
It happens in multiple cities across the nation. I know they do drag queen story hour up in Indianapolis quite a bit, especially during Pride Month.
And the community lost its
I was approached by the Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library One of my friends worked there and she asked me if I wanted to do it, and I said, sure, I'll do it. I would just be in drag reading to kids and dancing and interacting with the audience. There was backlash, obviously.
We are not here to reject the LGBT community in any way, shape, or form.
I am here to urge you to protect innocent little children over the desires of adult men dressed as women.
This event has been allowed under false pretenses and lies. You have defrauded the public, the people of Evansville, and broken our trust.
We are here simply to reject the program.
Use your influence to cancel the Drag Queen Story Hour.
I was at the first library board meeting where they discussed it, and I was one of 7 people in the room who were supportive of Drag Queen Story Hour with 200 plus people in the room. And I got up and I spoke, and people booed.
I didn't go to any of the meetings at all or public events. For the most part, I was just silent at the beginning until the day the event happened, and then I did the event.
And there was protesters, but there was also a big group of supportive gay people there to keep those protesters away.
I looked out the window when I was painting just to see what was going on. There was a bunch of protesters out there with megaphones, signs.
Seeing the crowd that turned out with signs with words that kids should not be reading, and having to escort kids from the parking lot covering their eyes with my sign of Florentine. And then you've got a crowd on the other side of the door that have rainbow umbrellas and are wearing capes. It was a stark contrast.
They did paint stuff on the windows for kids to look at and to not stare at the protesters. They had children workshops inside the library for them to entertain themselves and not be outside. In general, it was all amazing because I had all people of different walks of life all come into that room and watch me.
The kids were read to by a very pretty drag queen, and they all had a really good time. The world didn't stop spinning, and they added time slots to Drag Queen Story Hour because it was so popular.
From my understanding, I think it might have been 500 kids, I think, something like that. I was very shocked, very surprised because most of these parents, straight families, and I thought it was amazing to know that there are parents in this world that say that it's okay to be different.
Even the pastor that spoke against it, at every board meeting I was at, he was there too. At the end, he came and he shook my hand, and it was like, it was a good day. It was nuts. I wish that it would happen again.
It was sad that the director of the library got moved to a different library. She brought something that was, from my point of view, amazing.
The kings and queens have always been an important part of our community.
I don't understand that issue with people and drag queens. People have been watching drag queens their whole life.
Tootsie, that's Dustin Hoffman. Robin Williams is Mrs. Doubtfire.
Robin Williams, Tyler Perry, Patrick Swayze, they all were some of the best drag queens.
Oh, you'll sit in the theater and watch this stuff and think it's all great and wonderful, but then when you see it in your local bar, that's a sin? What the hell's the difference? We're actors. We portray a character.
Drag is just a stage performance.
When I put on makeup, it's like I'm not Chris. I'm this other person that don't care.
It's very much just a performance and just like this character that I've created.
Yes, some people are trans and they live that character, but me, I'm a character. Rachel is a character.
I think there was always the stigma of where they didn't understand that when you took that off of stage, you're not that character on stage anymore. I never fully felt that I wanted to become a woman.
It's definitely a really big misconception. I wouldn't want to become a woman.
I wouldn't want to be a woman for anything. I like playing one, but I don't want to be one.
That was just not who I was. I still enjoyed my life as a man.
For me, it's more so just like the gender expression, expressing my femininity that I wasn't like allowed to express when I was younger. Even just small things like playing with Barbies, I wouldn't be allowed to do. So it was just like a whole bunch of built up femininity that I wasn't allowed to express that now it's like oozing out.
Truthfully, I started drag at like a super young age. When my mom wasn't home, like I'd wear her red high heels and I wore a burgundy dress with daisies on it. And I would always drive around on our family farm riding a four-wheeler with a t-shirt on my head. And basically that would be my hair blowing in the wind. I don't know what I was expressing, but I was just kind of like living naturally, and that's just what I wanted to do. That's just basically what drag is to me, just self-expression.
It's who I can't be in real life.
or who I don't feel like I have the confidence to be.
Whenever a performer is on stage and they are in drag, it's a disguise, it's a costume. But also, whenever you see a performer on stage, they are creating what they believe is the most perfect version of themselves, or the most heightened version.
You can be as deep and raw and visible as you want. If you want to hide behind a song, you can do that.
I can be confident. I can be who I am. I don't have to hide anything from anyone. Like if I'm having a bad day, I put all my emotions into my performance.
We've all wanted to express ourselves in the way that we're not judged for. When people applaud that, it's like, oh, this isn't wrong, or this isn't something that I should be ashamed of, or something that I shouldn't try and hide. Like, this is what makes me a star and not what makes me less of a human, I guess.
And I think that freedom to feel accepted by a greater community is kind of what draws people to it, whether performing it or viewing it.
People get caught up in a lot of things, but we're people just like everybody else is, and that's just an outlet. Whether that's like hitting the gym or you're just into music, writing, reading, whatever, it's just expression.
Because once I get out of makeup, I'm like, I feel way better.
Not all gay people like drag queens that find that as an integral part of the gay society, I don't think.
I think that drag is a facet of our community that people focus on a lot. I think that a lot of times people get hung up on that being the only thing that represents queer culture. There are lots of queer musicians, queer comedians, queer artists, queer authors, and, you know, drag is one art form in a plethora of queer representation that we have. But I love drag, and I love drag shows, and I love drag bingo and brunch and all of the things, and we have a great drag community here in Evansville, and I think that drag is important because the representation and the kind of let your freak flag fly mentality that goes into drag, just existing, is rebellious.
Drag is an important part of the culture.
The drag gay culture goes back to like the 30s.
It was founded for a place for us to call like a home, and what I find so important about that is it is a big point of our culture because it allowed us to develop a culture.
I think when you're a part of a community that is very often not heard or demonized, you really have no choice but to make your own. I think for a long time, just like whenever there were speakeasies and things like that, it's a gay version of a speakeasy.
When I started out doing drag, I was glamour drag.
It was beaded gowns, it was big hair, it was full on what I would say Dallas and Dynasty type styles and format. And then you had the other side of drag, which was a camp drag. And that would be like a full beard, hairy chest.
But those were benefit groups. They did things to help people. Drag queens did things to pay rent.
The younger ones, they have opened the doors, and now there's really any kind of genre now in town.
There's not any limit to what you can do in drag or what you can be in drag. There's no stipulations, there are no rules. It is boundless.
When I first started doing drag, there was only 2 venues here that we could perform, the Brick House and someplace else. Nowadays, we have drag, like RuPaul's Drag Race on TV. It's more mainstream and people want that in their venue.
Now straight bars want gay venues or gay things to collaborate with them or take their entertainment and put them in their shows.
There's 2 places for sure that I perform at here, Boca Lounge and Mo's House. The 2 venues are considered a heterosexual bar, but yet they still give back to our community more than some other venues. They want that to be a part of their culture, and they truly invest in us.
They have been way more accepting than I ever even thought when I first started.
So one big difference that I've noticed is that gay bars are not full of gay people that much anymore. I feel like there's a lot more straight people going to the gay bars now.
Oftentimes, if you go there as a gay person, you may be the only gay person there, because a lot of times it's, groups of young women out for their bachelorette party. It's not a secret, clandestine place anymore.
We only have one here now, and it's not busy like it used to be 30 years ago. It used to be a packed place. On a good night, it's got a lot of people downstairs and the showroom's full, but by 12 o'clock, they're all going to different bars, because you can now.
And the building still represents, to me, in my heart, a safe place for gays to go to if they don't feel comfortable going to the straight bar. But for the most part, there's a lot of gay people going out and venturing out other places. Like it's safe enough to do that now.
I don't know that there are any entertainment venues that are unsafe for queer people in Evansville.
There are lots of businesses in Evansville that are very supportive of our community.
A lot of businesses are not afraid to post, it's a LGBT-friendly establishment. There's like a whole coalition of businesses. Like in the 90s, that would have got a Molotov cocktail thrown through your window.
I mean, yes, here and there you'll have your fight or something go on, but I feel like that's a generational change big time, because back in the day, that gay bar was your place and you stayed there to be safe and to do what you did.
I definitely think that there's been a shift in humanity as a whole, being more accepting, and I think that that's generationally.
The younger generation is much more accepting.
I'm 70 years old now, and people my age and older still don't want to talk about it. They may not be discriminatory, but they still would rather just go ahead about your business and don't flaunt it.
Don't push your, as they would call it, your gay religion on us.
I wouldn't say everyone is not accepting of an older generation, because I have seen plenty of people in an older generation love and accept so many people.
I've met multiple LGBTQ plus members of our community that have the world's greatest grandparents ever, and they've accepted them and have taken them in.
If I'm talking as a collective, I would say my generation, they're way more accepting now.
Oh yeah, young people are always more tolerant. If you look at any opinion poll of tolerance of gay marriage, tolerance of anything, you'll see a real generational change.
They honestly don't care what your sexuality is, what your identity is. You know, they want to get along.
Kids find out that kids are gay and they're like, okay, whatever, like, let's go play, like, we don't care.
The reality is, people who are 20 or 25 today have grown up in a world where being gay isn't even interesting. It just is.
People are more comfortable coming out now, and most people know a gay person.
It definitely is harder to judge when there's a face to it. I've encountered that. I think I've been that face for some people. I've heard some people make some kind of a comment using "that's gay" as a slur. My comment is always, be careful who you say that around, because you don't know exactly who you're saying it to. You can almost see that light bulb moment of, oh, sorry.
It's harder to hate somebody when you know their face. It's harder to hate somebody when they have a name, and I think that's a big part of the shift.
We've made such progress that people are feeling comfortable expressing how they view themselves in ways that they never would have been allowed to.
It's in an area where we're able to evolve and see more variety in sexual orientation, sexual identification.
And it's led to a whole bunch of, for someone my age, I'm really struggling now with pronouns.
Pronouns, I don't always get them correct.
I'm still learning about the pronouns.
As a gay male, a gay black male, even I don't understand the pronouns.
I think it's really important to recognize other letters of the LGBTQIA, and I think pronouns are also really important to address, because people do like to be called of how they feel. There's this experiment that I saw. Someone was calling a cisgendered person by the wrong pronoun the entire time they were talking to them. And after 10 minutes, the cis person was like, hey, don't call me that. I'm not a he, I'm a she. And it's see, pronouns do matter. But I know that there are some pronouns that are really hard to understand.
One time I was in a conversation with someone who's non-binary, and they go by it, them, and their. So I got a little confused with the story. I was like, who are you talking about? And they obviously explained to me who they were talking about. I was like, oh, okay. It's really more of a learning process nowadays.
I would say approach it the same way you would if you're sitting in a math class and you don't know the answer to something. Ask a question.
If you don't understand, ask. We have no problem with telling.
We know if you're trying to be respectful or trying to do better, as long as we can see that you're trying to address this correctly, it's all good,
As I get older, I see things that I don't always understand in our community. And I think back to when I came out to my parents, how they didn't understand. So I see kind of a parallel there. I just hope that the generation that's coming up now takes patience with people like me and people of my generation as we try to understand all the ins and outs.
It's taken the older generation a lot to really grasp and learn about all of this, and they've been doing a pretty great job. If it weren't for that generation, then the younger generation wouldn't have the privileges that they have. They've been on the forefronts fighting for our rights, getting this community to where it is.
It did take a lot of work to get us to the point that we're at today.
From whenever I was a child till now, there has been progress. To some degree, I think that's slow progress, but any progress is progress.
I think that Evansville has changed a lot from growing up in the 90s, being here, knowing that it wasn't cool to be gay, to now where we've got River City Pride, we've got a large festival and parade, and we do events throughout the year, and the mayor participates.
There are several organizations that have sprung up here under the LGBTQ identity. There's Hudson and Reed, they do a festival at Garvin Park in early June. River City Pride will do their parade and their festival at Haney's Corner.
5 years ago, my pastor looked at me and said, we have to have a safe LGBTQ youth group. So we had our first gathering for Greater Evansville Youth in September of 2019 to watch them grow together, develop these deep, beautiful friendships, to have this safe space where they can change their name every week if they want, or their pronouns every week if they want, and they get to just try themselves out and figure out who they are in a safe space. I can't imagine what it would have been like for me as a 15-year-old to have had that kind of environment around me.
The community has grown a lot.
I think when I first got here, a lot of LGBTQ people were kind of under the radar.
When I moved back, there was a very prominent gay community, a very engaged gay community.
Now, I have noticed that LGBTQ people have prominent roles in the city.
That gay community has now moved into a lot of leadership positions. You now have organizations and boards of directors and other folks actually seeking out diversity, actually wanting to include gay and lesbian individuals, people of color.
Sometimes it's nice to think about how much it's come, because sometimes it's easy to dwell on how much further we have to go, especially in a state like Indiana.
Every time you take a step, there's going to be a legislature that will try and beat that change back.
I am very fearful right now that what we're facing isn't so much the great progress we have left to go, but that it may go the other direction and move back for a while. There are still all kinds of efforts to try to reverse marriage equality. There are still efforts to limit the protections of sexual orientation, anti-discrimination laws, and other things. But I think about the movement right now, I'm really more about putting my fingernails in the concrete and holding on.
We are not fully accepted by everyone yet, but it's better.
Yes, it's more accepted. Yes, we can get married. Yes, I can walk down the street for the most part and show my public displays of affection, but there's still some reservations. There's still some, maybe I shouldn't hold your hand in this part of town.
You always got the prejudice, you always got the hatred.
You still have your places that will discriminate against gay and lesbian people, but I think those people have given up trying to persecute and get people fired from their jobs because they're gay. I think the new target are transgender people.
They are definitely what people are going after right now.
The trans community is still very unknown to the mainstream community, and so it's easier to be hateful.
Like I said, everybody knows somebody who's gay. Everybody knows their hairdresser is just the sweetest little thing. So I think that they needed a new villain. Typically, your villain is somebody you don't understand.
And it's really tragic. I have never met people who were more gentle and more easy to know as transgender people.
So actually when I was about 7, I have body dysmorphia, and I know that what that is now, but I didn't know that then. That's definitely whenever I started to realize that, hey, I don't feel like I'm in the right body. I lived as a stud lesbian or a butch lesbian until I realized that there are other people like me and there are things that I can do so that I can live a more authentic and happier life. And so I began to transition about 8 years ago. So I've been me, for 8 years.
At the end of the day, that's who they are. You can't take off being white. I can't take off being black. Being trans is who they are. I really hurt for them is because people are bashing them for who they can't change.
It's hard because a lot of issues have to do with the two things that I am the most that I can't do anything about, which is being trans and being of color. I'm so many things. My eyes are brown, I'm short, but I'm here, I'm 5'1". Like all these things. My shirt is pink, my pants are gray. It is that small, and I don't think about it as much as other people think about it. And the only time I have to think about it is because somebody else called attention to it.
Our society as a whole has taken the trans community and made a huge deal about bathrooms and a huge deal about dressing rooms.
The ID to pee, I remember whenever that came out in Nashville, it was very strange to me. You were so worried about us creeping in the bathroom, but you're creeping on me.
Like, honestly, do you check people's genitalia in restrooms? Like, I don't.
I don't know what else everybody else does in the bathroom, but I'm going in, I'm washing my hands, I'm coming out. I have to show an ID.
Last year, the Indiana legislature passed a bill about trans girls competing in sports. Like there's thousands of trans girls trying to compete in girls track and volleyball. All of the states that are trying to pass these anti-transgender laws.
I definitely think that it is a great fear for people who are trans because it constantly feels like if there's not one, it doesn't go through. There's one right behind it, on top of it, beside it. Okay, we're gonna scoot this one over and table this. Okay, the next bill. And it's the same thing. I feel like there are bigger issues in the world, way bigger than little old me and what I'm doing.
I think that they just wanted a villain, and they found one in something that they don't understand.
That's what we should be doing right now, is fighting for our friends who are trans to live their lives openly, publicly.
And again, I think that that's where the more people come out and the more people who are visible and the more representation we have is where that education comes in and where that change is on the horizon. The same as in 2015, gay marriage not ending the world. Eventually we will get to the point in our society and education that trans people aren't out to molest you in the bathroom, they're just there to pee.
It's come a long way. It's got a long way to go. All of us have a long way to go.
There has been so much progress in the last 10 years.
I would say 95% of the improvement has occurred in the last 10 or 15 years. And that 5% that set it up took an awful lot of work and a lot of time.
Of course, we want completely across the board equal rights for every human, not just queer people.
The biggest hurdles is just understanding how people want to live their lives. If it doesn't affect you, what is the big worry? For example, your life doesn't affect me, so I'm not going to worry about it. Me being gay doesn't affect you, what's the worry?
If that's the worst thing that your child can be, or if that's the worst thing that your sister, your brother, or your dad can be, we need to reevaluate a lot of things. What goes into making a person a decent human has nothing to do with who they are attracted to. And I think as a society, when we get past that, all of us, you, me, straight, gay, we're all shopping at the same grocery store. We're all going to the same restaurants. We're all just trying to make it, and I don't know why we can't make it cohesively.